Well, thank you. I really appreciate the warm welcome, Jill. You know, as I've learned at the museum at the Allen, with any event, everybody on the team helps. So I'm thanking everybody on. Also, at the U of I, we always started an event like this with a land acknowledgement. We don't have one here, but I would just encourage everybody to think about where their feet are meeting the ground and who had been on that land before we have been on that land. I'm so excited to be here. I wanted to share a little bit more about myself and my background, give a few thoughts about a broader vision for art museums in the present moment. So I first thought I would do something chronological, but instead I'll go about it another way, focusing on what I find so exciting and important about academic museums. Some existing opportunities, exciting opportunities I see for the Allen connected to my previous work as a curator and director. And then if we have time, some of the bigger issues facing museums and where I see the Allen in them. I wanted to start, since I'm new here, just a few things beyond the formal introduction, just about me a little bit. I'm from a working class family, originally from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. My dad really was a steel worker there. But, you know, and I always say that my interest in accessibility to all audiences stems from that upbringing. I'm a first-gen college student. My family really valued education. My other half, Daniel, is a classicist. He's teaching here at Oberlin right now. And then the dog is Lenny. I learned how to crochet sort of during the pandemic. I can assure you that was like the 2 seconds in which he actually kept the sweater on. Also, he's an escape artist, so if you see him running around Oberlin, just send him home. So it was really a dream come true when I saw the Allen was searching for a new director. It was such an easy choice. Excellence of the museum is incredibly well known in the museum field. Of course, the superlative students, the collections, the deep faculty engagement. I, in my previous institution, always used the Allen as a model for how the museum could and should be integrated into curriculum. Very long history of curatorial excellence. I also love that the Allen has this incredibly prominent and visible place on campus. This is very unusual for campus art museums. You often have to really work very hard to find and can't park near them. The Allen is really highly valued and supported by the college. And I think that's also something that is not a given for all academic museums. I made many happy discoveries on the ground once I got here. I inherited an institution that was incredibly well run. So thanks to Andrea Durstein and Katie Solander. Thank you, Katie, there in the back. The team is very powerful and engaged. The commitment to equity and inclusion is baked in. The commitment to accessibility is really impressive. It's also beautiful. I love this slide because it just shows that my compass as the director is literally inscribed on the building. Cause of art is the cause of the people. As most of you will know, it's from William Morris's 1880s lecture on art and socialism. So the building provides the guidance for the work. The cause of art is social engagement. It's learning. It's making meaning. It's meant to connect to all people and all communities. I will also say that my decision to come to Oberlin also stemmed from direct experience with the college during my time as curator in Cleveland. So I was blessed to have actually worked on two Oberlin projects while at the CMA. I had the great honor of reinstalling 12 galleries in Cleveland. Storytelling and approachability has always been important to me with collections. I was really struggling in 2010 with the Renaissance galleries. Their holdings then, maybe less than now, were uneven, a very wide and somewhat discordant range of media. It didn't tell the conventional story of the Renaissance. And thanks to early conversations with Professor Christina Nielsen, who I think is here. Yes, hello. I don't know if I ever thanked you properly for your contributions, but really emboldened me to take a thematic approach to the installation. No great shakes nowadays, but it really did at the time interrupt the CMA approach of a very even chronology and spoke to the actual objects directly. And so there, I really learned about the intellectual prowess of Oberlin faculty while reinforcing a way of telling stories that was important to me as a curator. During the Allen's closure back in 2010, 11, 12, Stephanie Wiles, a pre-predecessor of mine, arranged for outstanding works from the Allen to go to museums across the country. And so Andrea and I, we were both European art curators at the time. We collaborated on this installation at the Cleveland Museum of Art that told news stories by integrating Oberlin works into the galleries at Cleveland. So you see the Bertos sculpture, which was added to the galleries, and then the Boucher and Udry painting flanking the large Cleveland Boucher. It's a great idea. I mean, it kept work in the public eyes. It allowed students to remain in touch with the collection. It showed how the Allen and the CMA collections could really go toe-to-toe. The interpretation was also entirely by students. We co-taught a course module in 2010, leading to the project in 2011. Eric Inglis, I think you're here. I know you helped with that project too, particularly with the audio guides. But this was my introduction to Oberlin students. They wrote the wall text, created the audio interpretation, collaborated on the website. And, you know, of course, I always knew that students here were smart and hardworking, but I was less familiar with the drive, the creative energy, and the eagerness to experiment. One of the most important things about museum work is that it can be, should be, site of cutting edge research, kind of a lab to generate new knowledge. It's particularly important when institutions really allow artists in to experiment. I always think of artists as among our greatest thinkers and truth tellers today. They provide new avenues to approach problems and question structures. And a good example of this comes from the last exhibition I worked on when I was at Cleveland, Last Days of Pompeii, which was looking at the impact of Pompeii on artists and visual culture from the 18th century to now. It was something actually I realized I talked about here at this podium at a Tuesday tea back in 2012. It's actually feeling like physically familiar to me being here right now. It was an interdisciplinary project and involved archaeology and film and mapping. We also investigated the topic by including theater in the galleries. So embedded in the exhibition was a Cleveland experimental theater group called Theater Ninjas. This was led by Jeremy Paul. Some of you might know Jeremy, now the head of Maelstrom Arts in Cleveland, and now actually, as of a few weeks ago, working in the dance department here. So it's a remarkable reconvergence. He activated the galleries with actors in his group, and these devised an improvisational experiences. You see one example here. This wasn't advertised as a performance. So, you know, visitors would come upon the actors, which created and intensified this mystery and wonder for visitors, but also interrupted the authority of the exhibition. And it's, you know, you'll hear from me, you know, going forward. It's a really consistent interest of mine when performing artists activate museum spaces. So, but not just because we're a beautiful vessel for performance, but to have those performers be active partners in the space where the dancers, musicians, et cetera, artists create new ways to see the exhibition and the objects. So I'm incredibly excited by Emily French's work here with the conservatory to develop programs that are integrally related to the works that are on view. Another preoccupation of mine is how to do museum work that helps us understand our place. So rather than projects that could be anywhere, I'm interested in projects that must be at that particular museum and the place and the time. I was at Worcester as chief curator, just showing you some images of the structure. Those of you who don't know, it is actually one of the most significant historical museum collections in the U.S. It was very wealthy in the early 20th century, went on this long industrial decline. Has always been a major center for immigration since the Irish came in the 1830s, and a major refugee resettlement city. So the central challenge that the director put down for me and the team was to make that museum relevant to the current communities of central Massachusetts, rather than the white elite folks who had long supported it. And you know, one major goal was developing exhibition projects that were related to place and time in a much more inclusive way. So we did an exhibition on the photography of William Bullard, a photographer you will have never heard of, an untrained white vernacular photographer who did these extraordinary portraits in collaboration with Worcester's Black community from 1897 to 1970. A Clark professor, Jeanette Greenwood, had written a book previously about Worcester's early 20th century Black community. She really was a kind of a public historian, and so had developed in this project extensive community ties based on her archival research. And then miraculously, a huge group of glass plate negatives and the logbook emerged in town. A photographer discovered them, connected with Jeanette. And so, I mean, you can just imagine, like, suddenly this work that had been done with the professor and community members, it brought them to life in a way that was just remarkable, and with these really extraordinary, very interesting photographs. So it led to a museum project with a community advisory board and a project made with Clark University students that deepened the research, trained them in public history, and made the exhibition ultimately a huge family reunion. So here you're seeing a view of another project we worked on, Hassan Hajjaj, My Rock Stars. Those of you, some of you might know the artist. He's London-based, Moroccan. He works in photography, video, immersive installations, including this project, which was developed on portraits of international musicians. It's called My Rock Stars because they were literally his rock stars, his favorite performers. And he asked us to transform the gallery into a souk or marketplace, a gathering place, which integral to this work was finding commercial products to line shelves. And so, we collaborated with artists to create these walls of products that were explicitly meant to reflect the immigrant communities of Worcester. So, Armenian soda, Ghanaian canned goods, Vietnamese noodles. And so it took a project by, a very well-known international artist that was global, really fundamentally global, but also tied it back to who we were as Worcesterites. And so this line of thinking about the here is with me a lot when I settle in here. So the Allen, I would say, in a very different but still related way to the Oberlin, the excellent Oberlin Heritage Center, is the key site to generate understandings of who we are and where we are. So it's raising questions for me. These are just early on questions. So how to thread the needle of the Allen's origin story. I, am very eager to try to understand better how Standard Oil, Severance Family Support, art and socialism, and transcendental poetry all make for what was clearly a coherent story here in the middle of World War I. Or how do we come to terms with the fact that the greatest Oberlin artist of the 19th century, Edmonia Lewis, was treated so poorly here, while Oberlin at the same time always talks with such pride of our role in the Underground Railroad and abolition. And particularly as we start to think about the possibility of a building expansion, it's all the more important to think about where we are. I mean, whether it's the native history of Northeast Ohio, to the businesses and homes that stood like on this corner where we are now, to our incredibly illustrious over century-long history of Oberlin generating artists and art historians. Which brings me to what you might call the concentric circles around the Allen. How do we serve our neighbors? How can the Allen be a responsible citizen? How do we listen? What do our communities need for us? I'm keenly aware that we are the art museum for Lorain County, and that does come with the responsibility to lean in. I've also come to learn very quickly how much of Lorain County outside of Oberlin has very mixed feelings about the college. And so I'm, very encouraged by the exciting work that David Hertz and President Ambar are doing to become better neighbors and communicators with the city of Oberlin. It's a really great start. And I'm glad that they're including the Allen in that and in those conversations, including one that's going to be held here this evening. Brings many challenges, of course, but I also like to think that the Allen can support this work in an interesting way from our hybrid role, because we, of course, are fundamentally part of Oberlin College, but we're also a little apart from it, and also literally at the crossroads of a major county intersection. I think that's really significant. That location really means a lot. I'm still trying to work through exactly what that means. I'm also very excited to work with Alyssa Traister. Alyssa, are you here? On more direct community engagement here at the museum. Going to be really interesting and important work. And also, we just need to reduce the barriers to entry. And being a free museum is, of course, core to who we are, but that isn't itself always enough to convey full welcome to folks who haven't felt invited in with true hospitality. And, you know, another thing that I've been learning is, I don't know how legible this slide is, but, you know, who we are, the demographics where we are in Lorain County. I won't go over the numbers here, but it suggests that the work, for example, that Jill, Ellis, and Alyssa are doing here with disabled folks and older adults is a very smart idea. And, you know, how can these demographics further inform what we do and how we think? I'm also very eager to explore creative community partnerships. I'm going to show you just two past examples. Definitely not things I would suggest we recreate here in any way, but possible models for experiments that we can engage here. So what you're seeing here is a work of art, social practice work called the Cats in Residence program. So part of our work in Worcester was attracting new audiences. And we, you know, did this in part with a collaboration with the New York artist Rhonda Lieberman. So she had created this social practice project that existed in a number of locations called Cats in Residence, where she worked with artists to design an enclosure that was designed to bring rescue cats together with humans to foster adoptions in ways that were not possible in animal shelters. I mean, you know, we loved how she was pushing the boundaries of social practice art, which generally focuses on human interactions to include non-human animals. The structure was designed for both, and in a way, it was really, you know, meant to work in a way that a conventional shelter never could. But this kind of work can only exist in deep connection with an animal rescue. And so we developed this wonderful community partnership with WARL, the Worcester Animal Rescue League, who, you know, effectively agreed to open a satellite shelter at the museum. And I will say this was a co-curatorial effort I don't think I'll ever see again, and I'd never seen before, which brought together shelter volunteers, head of facilities who helped negotiate what live cats in the museum would actually be like. We learned a lot about ventilation. And audience and with our, you know, audience engagement and visitor services and artist. And then, you know, I was really serving as a coordinator there. You know, it was a project where we measured success both through the number of adoptions, probably more importantly, an uptick of visits to the rescue itself. And then through this enclosure, which reconsidered the way that companion animals and people can be together. Would I say this was a scholarly project? I would not. But it did the work that we needed it to do in terms of community engagement. Homemade with Love, More Living Room was another project. This is at Cranard Art Museum that experimented with some conventions of museum exhibitions. We were eager to explore forms of community engagement that were truly co-creations. This is a word that gets tossed around a lot, but I think very few of those partnerships are actually co-creating. So we brought a scholar and artist, sound artist, Blair Ebony Smith, a recent graduate from Virginia at the time, to Cranard Art Museum as a postdoctoral fellow. She had deep experience with a group some of you may have heard of called Soul Hot, which is Save Our Lives, Hear Our Truths, the collective scholars of Black feminisms who are working in public engagement research and Black girlhood studies. And they manifested their research, at least in part, in these long-running after-school programs with Black girls. So Blair brought that work into the museum. It really only existed previously in after after school programs at schools. And she developed an exhibition and research project entirely in collaboration with the middle school girls that combined the work of Black female artists in the collection, so works by Carrie Mae Weems, for example, with works of art and text that were by the girls themselves. Um, and then co-created this experience, this exhibition, both with and for the girls, and supported by Illinois students in the process. That was meant to evoke Black domestic space rather than a traditional gallery, which was meant to be a home for their dreaming and creation for a year. So, and Blair was like very clear that it was upending. Like this was a space for the girls, and then the rest of us as museum visitors were invited in. But the primary audience were folks that are generally highly excluded from the museum experience. And Blair was instrumental in transforming our practice. I can't say enough about this at Cranard Art Museum. We changed the education department to eventually to something called community engagement and learning, which reflected more about what we wanted to be doing. We continued to lean into community programs centered on Black arts. Some of you may know is also just a scholarly strength at U of I. And focused on and we learned that one key thing is to focus on partnerships that already exist rather than trying to create relationships from scratch. I'm also very interested in multilingual work. My previous institution, we experimented with a trilingual platform for actually this opened since I left the museum, so I'm curious how it's being received. Reinstallation of the pre-Hispanic Andes collection. So it was English, Spanish, and Quechua, which was, important for Spanish-speaking communities in Central Illinois, but also in this case, with our work, it was connected to our work developing a digital platform intended to be used by scholars and source communities in Peru. And I'm very encouraged by our early steps here, which reflects, my interest in approaching big challenges, with starting with case studies, which then build capacity. We learn from them, and then always, I think, certainly here, working steadily in concert with faculty, students, and community. So, all of you will, or most of you will remember Ana Diaz-Burgos's research and exhibition of What's in a Spell, the Love, Magic, Healing, and Punishment in the early modern Hispanic world, where Professor Burgos developed student-led and faculty-vetted Spanish translations and tours for the exhibition, which is now leading in turn to further collaborations in translating materials for our community days, which then allows us to start trust building and relationship building with Spanish-speaking communities. It shows that doing this project on the screen, shows that we have skin in the game. It's also, tied to faculty on campus who have already developed solid community connections, which I hope will lead to some honest conversations about what those communities want from the Allen and from Oberlin. What we want may not be what the community is interested in at all. This work is iterative. It's often very slow. It will sometimes involve students, sometimes it won't. It's not always visible, but these are the investments we need to make in order to grow. So, several people in this room know I am incredibly excited by the Frank Lloyd Wright House as part of the Allen. I mean, it's an incredible opportunity to have a historic house tied to an art museum. Right before I left Illinois, I had worked on a project that involved mid-century modern architecture. In short, it examined modernist houses designed by local architects, specifically to house avant-garde performance in Central Illinois. It included one house you're seeing here for a dance pioneer, a woman named Margaret Erlanger. And so you can just imagine how excited I got upon learning that Ellen Johnson, famous scholar and curator, director, everything professor, had lived in the house here in the Frank Lloyd Wright House and had activated it with artists and works of contemporary art. It just hits lots of notes for me. The female patronage of Margaret Weltzheimer is interesting to me. The way the house was animated by Ellen Johnson. Also, that the house has this kind of official story that we seem to be at a moment where we could reconsider and expand that story. And it's a building that we could, I would just love to reactivate with research, with art, and with performance. And as one example of how this generative research can have, I'll explain the slide in a second, can happen with faculty and students around the house. So a colleague of mine at Illinois, Dance, Anna Shaposhnikov, developed a work that was based on women's exercises that were presented in 1950s Good Housekeeping albums. She called it Good Housekeep. It definitely revealed a very sinister underside of those albums. When Anna learned about the exhibition, we started a collaborative process where she had revisited this work that had been performed previously, and she rethought it by doing rehearsals in the houses featured in the exhibition. Then we staged the work in the exhibition itself. We then collaborated on a project in which the dance was restaged in the Erlanger House, and then in turn projected on the facade of the house as part of a community event with the city of Urbana. So, again, iterative. And our research, in other words, was also mutually informing each other's work, and that research was manifested in multiple public events well beyond the museum itself. So, as you can tell, I'm very upbeat about the work museums can do. I'm also, of course, keenly aware that the history of art museums has many troubled legacies to confront, to repair, to address. Most obviously, I'll just choose one. In the colonial project of global collecting and the transformation of cultural heritage and objects, beings, sacred materials, grave goods into commodities, and then ultimately into works of art. And I've just been really encouraged by the team's willingness here to embrace this aspect of the work. And in a way, that doesn't problematize ourselves into this kind of stasis or state of discouragement. Which I see happening at a lot of and so I'll just end by just saying a few things. I really believe that art museums in academic institutions have this incredible role that they can play by being a lab, so a place that can generate original research, whether art historical or historical, whether or in public engagement. That the museum can also be a sanctuary. So in this case, I'm showing a project that our educators at Cranard Art Museum worked on called Rest Lab, which brought intentional resting into the museum. And that we're a civic center. So just another project from Cranard called Art Remastered, where an educator, Camila Glowacki, developed a rapport with the indie music, hip hop scene in Champaign-Urbana, and connected performers and composers with works of art, and then they would create an original composition and perform that in front of the work of art in the museum. And that a civic center can also really take on some big projects. At Worcester Art Museum, we literally transform the museum a couple of times a year into a voting site, which is not uncommon for art museums these days, but also for me, incredibly moving, partly because my father is an immigrant and was a naturalized citizen, in naturalization ceremonies that took place in the museum, where I now have to say, and the judge completely understood that the importance of having this event take place in an art museum with a global collection. So, and then I'll just end with this image just to say as a question to all of us, so, what if? And then I'll stop there. I'm sure there's questions. Thank you. I appreciate the time.